Ever dreamed of living in a castle? Waking up in a grand four-poster bed, strolling through stone corridors, maybe even commanding knights from a majestic throne room? It all sounds incredibly romantic, right? Well, I'm here to burst that fairy tale bubble. The reality of living in a medieval castle was less Game of Thrones glamour and more, well, gross. So, grab your hand sanitizer, because we're about to take a deep dive into the filthy, smelly, and downright uncomfortable truth of castle life. First, let's talk about the smell. You think your roommate who forgets to take out the trash is bad? Try living in a giant stone box with hundreds of people, dozens of animals, and zero modern plumbing. Castles stunk. I mean, they really stank. The main source of this unforgettable aroma was human waste. Forget pristine white toilets. They had garderobes. A garderobe was basically a stone toilet seat sticking out from the castle wall, with a hole that dropped straight down into the moat or a pit below. Imagine the smell wafting up on a warm day. Plus, these shafts were a security risk. Attackers could and did try to climb up them to get inside the castle. Talk about an unpleasant surprise for everyone involved. When they weren't using garderobes, people used chamber pots, which were just bowls they kept under their beds. Once full, a servant would have the lovely job of trotting it through the castle and chucking the contents out a window. Hence the famous cry, "Guardy, Lou!" A warning for anyone walking below to watch out for flying, well, you know. So next time you see a romantic movie scene with someone leaning out a castle window, just remember what else might have been flying out of it. The moat wasn't a beautiful water feature for swans. It was a stagnant open sewer filled with everything from kitchen waste to the contents of those very chamber pots. Now, what about personal hygiene? Showers? Bathtubs? Forget about it. Bathing was a rare and complicated event. Most people, even lords and ladies, washed using a basin of cold water. A full-body bath was a luxury. They bring in a big wooden tub and fill it with hot water, which had to be heated over a fire and carried bucket by bucket. It was such a hassle that the whole family would often share the same bath water. The lord of the castle would go first, followed by his lady, then the children, and finally the highest-ranking guests, all in descending order of importance. By the time the last person got in, the water would be lukewarm and pretty disgusting. This is where the saying, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater" comes from. The water was so murky, you had to be careful not to accidentally toss out a small child along with it. And soap? It existed, but it wasn't the fragrant, bubbly stuff we have today. Medieval soap was made from animal fat and ash. It smelled awful and was harsh on the skin. Most people preferred to just mask their body odor with herbs and perfumes, rather than actually wash it away. So everyone from the noblest king to the humblest servant carried around a certain personal fragrance. Okay, let's move on from the smells and into the living quarters. Those vast, echoey great halls you see in movies look amazing, but in reality, they were freezing. Castles were built from stone for defense, not comfort. Stone is a terrible insulator. The only sources of heat were massive, open fireplaces. While they looked impressive, they were incredibly inefficient. If you were standing right next to the fire, you'd be roasting. But take a few steps away and you'd be shivering. The heat went straight up the chimney, along with a ton of smoke that would fill the room, stinging your eyes and coating everything in a layer of soot. To combat the cold, they hung heavy tapestries on the walls. These weren't just for decoration. They were a crucial layer of insulation. But they also collected dust, grime, and became cozy homes for bugs and rats. Speaking of pests, you weren't alone in your castle. You had roommates. Thousands of them. Rats, mice, fleas, lice, and bedbugs were constant companions. They were everywhere, in the kitchens, in the great hall, and yes, even in your bed. Straw was used for everything, stuffing mattresses, covering the floors, and feeding animals. It was a perfect breeding ground for fleas and lice. The straw on the floor, called rushes, was rarely changed. Instead, they just piled a fresh layer on top, trapping old food scraps, spilled drinks, and animal droppings underneath. Eventually, you'd be walking on a compressed mat of filth that was inches thick. Sweet dreams, right? Sleeping in a four-poster bed with curtains wasn't just for privacy. It was a practical way to stop things like dirt, bugs, or even small rodents from falling on you from the ceiling during the night. Now let's talk about the food. You might imagine lavish banquets with roasted swans and mountains of delicacies. And while feasts did happen, the day-to-day diet was much less glamorous. For the average castle resident, food was bland and repetitive. Bread was the staple, but not the soft, fluffy kind. It was a dense, dark, gritty loaf. Why gritty? Because the stone grinding wheels used to make flour would often chip, mixing stone dust into the dough. This wore down people's teeth over time. Meat was a luxury, and when they did have it, it was heavily salted or smoked to preserve it, since there was no refrigeration. To mask the taste of meat that was starting to go bad, they used a lot of strong spices, if they could afford them. For everyone else, it was mostly a stew called pottage, a watery mix of whatever vegetables, grains, and scraps were available, simmered for hours over the fire. Sometimes the same pot of pottage would just be topped up day after day, for weeks on end. And what about privacy? In a word, non-existent. A castle was a bustling, 24/7 military base and administrative center. The Great Hall was the main living space where people ate, worked, held court, and often slept. Even the lord and lady's private chamber wasn't truly private. Servants, ladies-in-waiting, and attendants were always coming and going. Your bed might be in a partitioned-off area, but you could hear everything happening just a few feet away. Life was loud, crowded, and public. The romantic notion of a quiet, peaceful castle retreat is pure fantasy. So, living in a castle was a constant battle against cold, darkness, filth, and foul odors. The air was thick with smoke, the floors were covered in rotting garbage, and your bed was likely crawling with bugs. You'd be sharing your bath water, eating gritty bread, and you'd never ever be truly alone. It was a far cry from the fairy tale castles we see in Disney movies. While they were incredible feats of engineering and vital for defense, they were not designed for comfort. They were cold, damp, and dirty fortresses. So the next time you find yourself wishing for a simpler time, just remember the reality of medieval life. Be grateful for your central heating, your hot shower, and your clean, bug-free bed. The modern world, with all its complexities, has some comforts that even the most powerful king or queen could only dream of. The romantic fantasy of castle life is just that, a fantasy. The reality was a daily struggle for survival in a world that was, to be frank, pretty disgusting. Thanks so much for joining me on this rather grimy tour of medieval history. If you enjoy getting the dirty details, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more myth-busting adventures. Let me know in the comments what historical topic you want me to tackle next. See you in the next video.